Hello and welcome to my YouTube tutorial for the Ahsoka Headpiece pattern found on my Etsy. You can get a link in the description. I hope this tutorial helps you figure out how to put together your own Ahsoka costume. Here is what it will look like when it's all assembled. Okay, so all you're going to do really is print them out, tape them together, and then you're basically just pinning them to the fabric and cutting. So remember that when you're doing this, that you do need to make sure to leave a seam allowance. It's up to you how wide you want that seam allowance to be. Just make sure it's consistent, because if you make a really wide seam allowance, but then don't sew in the seam allowance, the headpiece will be wider than you want it to be. Okay, so at this point we have a few pieces. This is the forehead piece. I need just one copy. That's the one that's going to go here. I cut 2 copies of the front part. Notice that all of them have the same seam allowance, which is about a 1/2 inch. You can make your seam allowance larger or smaller depending on what you want. I have 2 of my back panels that go back here, and 2 of the tails. So I'm going to just kind of show you how I'm going to pin these together so you know what to do for yourself. Here's a quick tip for when you're sewing the pieces that have 2 on them. So in case you're not familiar with sewing, what you can do is just fold the fabric, and then your pattern piece will go here, and you'll just pin it, and then when you cut along the edge, you'll end up cutting. Okay, so here the pieces all cut out with the seam allowance. And I'm going to show you which ones. A few of them, the ones that need interfacing, which is a kind of stiffening fabric that you can iron on. What I'm going to do is probably put some of it here, because I noticed that the back tail tends to bend right here, so maybe put some here. Don't need any here. Well, you can maybe put some up here if you want. You definitely want some right here, because again, this will bend. Don't need it here, and I would cover this whole. Alright, so as you can see, I'm just reusing the pattern pieces, pinning them in. Even though I need 2 of some of these, I'm not going to double up, because I need to make sure that they're mirrored. Notice here I'm kind of cutting under the pattern because I do not need a seam allowance on my interfacing. Okay, so at this point you are almost done, but you just have to attach the head part to the laku. So since you want to do right sides together, you need to flip this inside out, both sides, so that you can pin it to the tail to the rest of it. So this is a good time to see if any of your stitches didn't come out properly so that you can go and fix it beforehand. To make that extra piece for the tail, what I find to be most helpful is I just take the finished part of the tail here, and then you can kind of just like set it here and then figure out how wide you want your tail to be. So usually I probably only want my tail to be about this wide. So what I'm going to do is just cut it here, leave the seam allowance, and then up here. And then what you can do is just pin the right sides together and sew. Okay, so as you can see here, I just kind of pinned it in, just going right sides together. Right sides only really matters for the tail, not the extra piece, because there is no right side. And so I'm just going to sew here and here. What you can see I did on the inside, and it's kind of hard to see because everything's white, is I just folded over a little seam allowance. You don't have to do this, it's all going to be on the inside, but I think it looks nicer. And so when I sew, I'm just going to sew across the top here, just on that one layer, because I need to have stuff go inside here and along here. Okay, so I have my part sewed, and then you can just kind of flip it inside out, and this whole thing is going to eventually be stuffed with the fiber fill or polyfill, whatever you use. And so now we get to attach the tail to the rest of it. So like with the other things, you always want to make sure it's right sides together. So I have my right side out of my tail with my extra piece, this part ready to hold more fabric. And then all I'm going to do, so this has to go here. So I'm going to line it up, the seam right here and the seam in the middle here, flip it upside down, and then just pin right sides together. It's kind of hard to see. It's important that that little seam lines up. It just looks a lot nicer when it's lined up. Okay, and so once you have that pinned, it's kind of hard to show you, but you're just kind of maneuvering it and pinning. So you're just going right sides together. Because you're sewing a curve to something that's less curvy, it's probably not going to look super straight, but that's normal. You just want to make sure that there's nothing really bunching, because that won't look great. And I am probably going to pin and sew it all the way down because I like not being able to see hair. So for now, I think I'm just going to stop where I have my little extra piece here. And honestly, usually it's easier if you do one side first and then pin the other one, just because then you don't have to worry about pins everywhere. But I think I'm just going to do both to save myself time. So then you flip it away the other route, and then you're just kind of maneuvering the fabric so you can pin it together. This is probably the hardest part to show, but it's not actually that hard. Since everything's flexible, you can just kind of tuck the montrals inside and then just keep pinning. So it's not sewed yet, but you can see that if it poofs up, you kind of have the shape there already. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and sew. Okay, so we're almost done. The last thing that just has to happen is you're just going to, all those raw edges, you're just going to fold them over and hem them. Also, just a quick tip for sewing curves. You'll probably notice that it's kind of hard to fold and pin a curve. So what you can do is just take your scissors as you're folding and you just snip a little tiny slit in the edge, and that'll help you kind of fold it and pin it. For me, it's usually helpful to cut 3 slits, one here, and one here. This is how it looks with the pins in it. I've pinned all around here and then back here. Okay, so all the hem has been sewn, so it's time to just stuff it and make sure the shape is correct. So here's my dry bag of polyfill. I got it on sale. And now to stuff. Alright, so this is the finished product, at least without the paint. And I think it's good. Here's inside. I'm wondering if I want to make the back lacoon a little bit longer. What I also did is I left some space in the stuffing, so I actually stuffed my ponytail into the back so that because I kept running into problem with it kind of sliding down. I don't know if you can see it, but there's this back panel that I actually let fall down, and I kind of put that in there to kind of help keep the hair and the stuffing up. I think it's a little bit better now that it's gone. But yeah.